to the Sleepweaver's stories, where dreams take shape in whispered words to guide you towards a night of restful sleep. If you enjoy the journey, consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can get exclusive early access to all our episodes. So, let's settle in, take a deep breath, and let's begin. Rapunzel by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there was a man and a woman who longed for a child for many years. At last, the woman believed her wish would soon be granted. From the window of their small home, she could see a magnificent garden full of the most vibrant flowers and herbs. It was enclosed by high walls, for it belonged to a witch, an infamous woman of great power, feared by all. One evening, as the woman gazed from her window, she noticed a bed of rampion, lush and green. A sudden craving overtook her, an aching need for its taste. And day by day, the longing grew, until she became pale and sick. The woman turned to her worrying husband. "If I cannot taste the rampion from that garden," she spoke, "I fear I shall waste away." Desperate to save her, the man resolved to climb the wall. Under the cover of twilight, he scaled its great height, landing softly among the fragrant blooms. With trembling hands, he gathered a handful of the coveted leaves and fled. That night, his wife ate the rampion with delight, her colour returning, her spirits lifting. But her hunger did not fade. The next day, she desired it even more. The man, unwilling to see his wife suffer, returned to the garden. But this time, as his fingers brushed the delicate leaves, a shadow loomed behind him. "How dare you steal from my garden?" the witch spoke. Her eyes gleamed in the darkness. The man fell to his knees. "Forgive me. My wife longed for this rampion so desperately. I feared she would waste away without it." The witch studied him, then smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "If your wife's hunger is so great, then I will strike a bargain. Take all the leaves you desire, but when your child is born, you will give it to me." The man recoiled. Sheer terror stole his words. The weight of her gaze bore down on him, and in his desperation, he agreed. And so, when the child was born, the witch came and named her Rapunzel. Over the years, Rapunzel grew into a girl of radiant beauty. Her hair spun gold, her eyes as bright as the sky after a summer storm. And when she came of age, the witch took her deep into the forest and shut her inside a tower. It had no doors, no stairs, only a single window high above. Each day, the witch stood below and called, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And Rapunzel, obedient and trusting, would loosen her long braids and lower them down, the strands gleaming in the light. And so the witch would climb, each day using the golden rope to reach her. And Rapunzel's life passed, day by day, her world no wider than the walls of the tower around her. But one day, as she sat by her window singing to the wind, a young prince passed through the forest below. He halted, his heart caught in the melody drifting through the trees. He returned each day, hiding among the branches, listening to the voice that enchanted him. And one evening, he saw the witch approach and heard her familiar call. He watched in wonder as a girl appeared in a tower window, letting down her hair so long and gold, and the old woman climbed up and disappeared through the window. "Is that the way inside?" he murmured. As night fell, he stepped to the base of the tower and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And the locks of golden hair fell, and he climbed just like the old woman before. When he reached the window and swung inside, Rapunzel gasped, stumbling backwards. Never had she seen a man before. Certainly not one with eyes alight, with curiosity and with wonder. "Who are you?" she said. And the prince bowed slightly, a smile playing at his lips. "I am a traveller who heard your voice so pure, brilliant and beautiful. I could not stay away." At first, Rapunzel was frightened. But as they spoke, she found herself drawn to him, his kindness, his laughter, his tales of the world beyond her tower. He returned each night, bringing silk for her to weave into a ladder so she might one day escape. But before their plan was complete, Rapunzel, in her innocence, asked the witch, "Dame Gothel, why is it that only you and a prince will come visit me?" And the witch's eyes darkened. A shadow filled the room. A great power stirred at her fingertips. "You wicked child, you have betrayed me with another." In a fury, she seized Rapunzel's hair, wrapped it around her hand, and with a single stroke of her shears, she cut it. The golden strands fell to the floor like discarded sunlight. And that same night, the witch took Rapunzel far away, casting her in the barren wilderness where she would know only sorrow. And that same evening, when the prince arrived, the witch was waiting for him. She fastened Rapunzel's leftover braids to a hook and let them tumble down. When the prince climbed through the window, he found not his beloved, but the cruel smile of the infamous witch, Dame Gothel. "The bird you have sought has flown," she sneered, "and you shall never see her again." Despair struck the prince like a blade. In his grief, he leapt from the tower. He survived, but the thorns below stole his sight, leaving him to wander the land in darkness. And the prince roamed on, blind and broken, through forests and fields, through valleys and storms. And in time, his wandering led him to a desolate land, where the wind carried a familiar melody, soft, sorrowful, yet still filled with hope. He followed the sound, his heart racing, until at last he found her. "Rapunzel," he breathed, tears streaming down his face. At the sound of his voice, the woman turned. Tears welled in her own eyes, and she ran to him, her hands trembling as she touched his face. And as his tears fell, they bathed his wounded eyes, washing away the darkness, undoing a dark spell of the thorns, so that when he opened them, he could see the world again, and in it, the woman he had never forgotten. Jorinda and Jorindel by the Brothers Grimm. Long ago, deep in a dense, shadowed forest, stood an ancient castle, cold and as silent as the grave. It belonged to an enchantress, a woman of terrible power, who could take any form she pleased. By day, she roamed as an owl, gliding between the trees, her sharp eyes watching the paths below. At dusk, she slunk through the undergrowth as a cat, unseen and unheard. But by night, the enchantress was simply an old woman, the presence of her immense power as unsettling as the whisper of wind through dead and dry branches. Any man who strayed too close to her castle would find himself frozen in place, unable to move until she released him. And if a young maiden wandered near, she would suffer a far crueler fate. The enchantress would transform her into a bird. She would lock her in a cage and hang her amongst the hundreds of others also trapped within the castle walls. Jorinda was one such maiden. She was fairer than any who had come before her, with eyes bright as morning, and a voice that carried like a birdsong through the trees. Her love, Jorindel, was a humble shepherd, and they had long planned to marry. One evening, they stole away into the woods, longing for a quiet moment together. "Now remember, we ain't to go near the castle," Jorindel warned, though the warmth of the setting sun made the world feel safe. As Jorinda sat herself down to watch the sky. As she gazed at the last slither of sun sinking below the hills, an eerie hush fell over the woods. The air thickened, the trees darkened. A heavy silence pressed down on them, making Jorindel's heart pound in his chest. He turned, and just like that, he froze. Through the tangled undergrowth, he saw it. The castle's stone walls, black against the deepening twilight. A chill gripped him. "Jorinda," he whispered, reaching for her hand. But her song and her smile had already faltered. Before him stood not his love, but a nightingale, its feathers trembling, its tiny voice releasing only a last mournful note. A great owl with eyes like burning coals began to circle them. Its cry was sharp and piercing. Jorindel tried to run, to move, to do anything at all, but his feet were rooted to the earth. He could not call out. He could not fight. He could only watch in horror as the owl vanished into the trees, and from the darkness emerged the wicked and terrible enchantress. Pale and thin she was, and she swept toward him. Her bony hands curled forward like claws. She muttered a spell beneath her breath, plucked the nightingale from the ground, and held it close. And then, without so much as a glance in his direction, she turned, left Jorindel behind, and disappeared into the castle with his love. The moment the heavy doors slammed shut behind her, Jorindel's body was released. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath. And as the sun slipped over the horizon, the only sound to be heard was the rustling of the leaves. And just like that, Jorindel was alone. For days, the young shepherd wandered the edges of the forest, calling Jorinda's name, but there was no answer. The castle remained silent, the air heavy with enchantment. With no other choice, Jorindel left his home behind. He took work as a shepherd in a distant village, though no place felt like home without his beloved Jorinda. One night, Jorindel dreamed. He saw a flower, deep purple with velvet petals. Nestled in its center was a pearl that shone like the moon. In his dream, he reached for it, and the moment his fingers brushed against its petals, a great power surged through him. He saw himself standing before the castle doors, holding the flower high, and wherever its glow touched, the spell of the enchantress crumbled to dust. And when he awoke, his heart was filled with purpose. For 8 days he searched the hills and valleys, turning over leaves, peering under rocks, desperate to find the flower. And at dawn, on the 9th day, he saw it, growing in the shade of an old oak tree. Jorindel plucked it and set off at once, walking without rest until he reached the castle in the woods. This time, when he stepped within the cursed boundary, his feet did not falter. He walked straight to the doors, pressed the flower against the iron latch, and watched as in a blast of light the lock snapped open. The castle groaned, its magic weakened under the flower's touch. Jorindel stepped inside. The sound of song filled the air. Hundreds of cages hung from the rafters, each one home to a delicate bird. And there, beneath the golden glow of candlelight, sat the enchantress, and her lips curled in fury. In an instant, she lunged, but as soon as she had stepped forward, the flower's light flared once more. She hissed, scrambling backward, but her own magic could no longer protect her. Jorindel raised the flower high, and as its glow spread through the chamber, the air around began to shimmer. One by one, the cages swung open. Birds burst forth in a flurry of colour, their wings stretching as the spell that bound them became unravelled. He turned, searching the flurry of wings, his heart pounding. Then he saw her. A single nightingale hovered before him, her tiny body trembling. And so Jorindel lowered the flower, touched its petals to the bird's feathers, and in an instant she stood before him, whole again. Jorinda gasped, her hands pressing against her own skin as if she could not believe she was herself once more. Her eyes met his, and she flung her arms around him. Jorindel held her tightly and whispered soothingly into her ear, "Let's go home." He touched the flower to the last cage, freeing the final bird, before taking Jorinda's hand and leading her from the castle. The walls groaned, the ground trembled, and as they crossed the threshold, the castle doors slammed shut behind them. The enchantress and her dark, wicked magic were no more. Jorindel and Jorinda returned to their village, their hands clasped, their hearts light. And as for the other maidens who had been trapped for so long, they too found their way home. And as the dark magic faded, they too found their forms, to never again be bound in iron cages, and to live freely forevermore.